The Alpha King raised his hand to open the door, then froze. A woman's voice whispered from inside, not begging for mercy, but praying for the pack that had locked her away. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, feeling the grain bite into his skin. The corridor was cold. Stone walls sweat with dampness, torches guttering low in their iron brackets. This part of the estate wasn't meant for guests. It was meant for forgetting. And yet someone had remembered her. The whispers had reached him 3 nights ago, carried by a wolf too young to know when to keep his mouth shut. Rebellion, they said. A prisoner held without trial. A woman locked away by his own counsel, sentenced in a closed chamber while he'd been handling border disputes in the north. He'd come to investigate, to demand answers, to remind his advisors that no one made decisions about life and death without his knowledge. But now, standing outside this door, he couldn't move. Because that voice, soft, broken, achingly familiar. She wasn't screaming, wasn't clawing at the walls or hurling curses at the guards who'd abandoned their post hours ago. She was praying. Words so quiet he had to hold his breath to hear them. Keep them safe, she whispered. Even the ones who hate me. Especially them. Let the borders hold. Let the children grow strong. Let the pack survive another winter. His chest tightened. The Alpha King Kirin, though few dared use his name, had heard 1,000 voices in his lifetime. Pleas for mercy. Declarations of loyalty. Screams of rage. But this gentle, selfless murmuring from a woman they'd thrown into darkness? It cracked something in him he didn't know was fractured. He turned the iron handle. The lock had been left open careless, or perhaps intentional. The door groaned inward, and the smell hit him first. Damp stone. Old straw. Blood. The chamber was barely large enough to stand in. No window. No bed. Just a thin scattering of straw in one corner and a woman curled against the far wall, her knees pulled to her chest. She didn't look up when the door opened. Didn't flinch. Didn't stop praying. Let him find peace, she whispered, her voice fraying at the edges. Let him forget the battlefield. Let him sleep without nightmares. Let him stop. His voice came out rougher than he intended. It echoed off the stone, too loud, too sharp. She went silent immediately, her whole body going rigid. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. Kirin felt the world tilt. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and something darker, dried blood from a split lip. Her hair hung in tangled waves, dull and matted. Her dress, once perhaps a simple working gown, was torn at the shoulder and hem. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Gray. Storm cloud gray. Wide and wary and heartbreakingly familiar. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them before. Years ago. On a battlefield soaked in rain and blood, when he'd been pinned beneath a rogue wolf twice his size, claws tearing into his side. When he'd been certain he was going to die. And a voice, a woman's voice, had called out from somewhere in the chaos. Not his name. Not a command. Just a single, desperate word. Live. He'd heard a scream. Felt the weight lifted off him. Saw silver light flash through the storm. And when he dragged himself upright, gasping, bleeding, trying to find her, she was gone. He'd spent months searching. Sent scouts. Offered rewards. But no one had come forward. No one had claimed the kill. And eventually, he'd been forced to believe she'd died in the fighting. That the woman who'd saved his life had been swallowed by the same war that had nearly taken his. But she hadn't died. She was here. Locked in a cell beneath his own roof. You, he breathed. She blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Then recognition. Then something that looked like grief. You're alive, she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Or maybe a prayer answered too late. Kirin stepped into the cell, letting the door swing shut behind him. The space was so small he could have crossed it in 2 strides, but he stopped halfway, giving her room. giving himself time to process what he was seeing. "Who are you?" he asked, though part of him already knew. Part of him had always known. She didn't answer right away, just stared at him with those storm gray eyes, searching his face like she was trying to decide if he was real or some cruel hallucination. Finally, she looked away. "No one," she said quietly. "I'm no one." "Liar." The word snapped out before he could stop it. She flinched, and he hated himself for it. But he couldn't let her retreat. Not now. Not when he was this close to understanding. "You saved my life," he said, softer this time. 5 years ago. Northern border. The ambush at Blackwater Ridge. You were there." Her jaw tightened. She didn't deny it. "Why didn't you come forward?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I searched for you." "I would've." "You were dying," she interrupted, her voice raw. "I saw you go down. Saw the blood. And then the fighting got worse and I lost sight of you, and when it was over, they said the Alpha King's heir had fallen. That you didn't make it. But I did. I know that now. So why are you here? Why are you locked in my dungeon like a criminal?" She laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound that made his chest ache. "Because that's what I am," she said. "That's what they decided. What your council decided." "On what grounds?" She finally looked at him again, and this time there was something fierce in her eyes. Something that burned despite the exhaustion, despite the pain. "Because of what I am," she said. "Because of what I did that night. They saw the light. They saw what happened when I called on the old magic to save you. And they decided I was too dangerous to let live." The old magic. Kieran's blood went cold. "You're one of the marked," he said slowly. She didn't confirm it. Didn't need to. The truth was written in the way she held herself, in the faint shimmer that seemed to cling to her skin even in the darkness. The marked. Children born with the ability to channel the ancient power that had once belonged to the first wolves. It was rare. It was feared. And in most packs, it was a death sentence. "They were going to execute you," he said, the realization settling like lead in his stomach. "They still might," she replied. "Unless you've come to do it yourself." "No." The word came out hard. "Final." She blinked, surprise flickering across her face. Kieran moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. Close enough to see the faint scars on her hands. Close enough to catch the scent of her rain and wildflowers, even through the grime and fear. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Celine." "Celine," he repeated, letting the name settle in his chest. "You saved my life. And they repaid you with this." She didn't respond. Just watched him with those wary, storm-gray eyes. "I'm getting you out of here," he said. "You can't." "I'm the Alpha King," he cut in. "I can do whatever I damn well please." He stood, reaching down to offer her his hand. She stared at it like it might burn her. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "You're wrong," Kieran said quietly. "I owe you everything." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached up and placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, trembling, but her grip was strong. And when he pulled her to her feet, he felt it, a spark of something ancient and electric, singing through his veins like recognition. Like destiny. Celine swayed the moment she stood, and Kieran's hands moved on instinct, one catching her elbow, the other steadying her waist. She stiffened at the contact, every muscle in her body going taut like a bowstring pulled too tight. "Easy," he murmured, keeping his voice low, unthreatening. "When's the last time you ate?" She didn't answer. Just stared at the point where his hand rested against her side, like she couldn't quite believe he was touching her without violence. Without chains. "Celine," he pressed, and something in his tone made her eyes snap up to his. "How long have you been down here?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice hoarse. "There's no light. No windows." "I stopped counting days after," she trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." The words came out harder than he intended, edged with an anger that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the men who'd put her here. His counsel, his advisors, men he'd trusted to uphold justice in his absence, men who would answer for this. But first, he needed to get her out. He released her carefully, watching to make sure she could stand on her own. She could barely, though he noticed the way she kept one hand braced against the wall, her legs trembling with the effort. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can manage." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tightened, pride flickering in those gray eyes despite everything. "I said I can manage." Stubborn. Even now, locked away and starved and beaten, she had fire in her. It made something twist in his chest, respect, admiration, and underneath it all, a fury so deep it felt like it might consume him. "Then stay close," he said, moving toward the door. "And don't argue with anything I say until we're clear of this place." "Understood." She nodded, though he caught the flicker of suspicion in her expression. She didn't trust him. Not fully. And he couldn't blame her. For all she knew, this was another trick. Another cruelty from a pack that had already taken everything from her. He pulled the door open, stepping into the corridor first. The torches had burned even lower now, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them like grasping fingers. The air was thick with the smell of damp stone and old blood, a scent he'd never noticed before, never thought to notice, because this part of the estate was supposed to be empty. Except it wasn't. They'd been using it as a prison. For her. For gods knew who else. His hands curled into fists. "Kieran." Her voice was soft, uncertain. He glanced back to find her standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the darkness of the cell. She looked like a ghost. A spirit pulled from the shadows. "What is it? Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You're the Alpha King. You could have just ordered me released. Sent guards. You didn't have to come yourself." He held her gaze, weighing his answer. He could tell her it was duty. That he'd come to investigate a rumor and found something that demanded his immediate intervention. That would be true enough. But it wouldn't be the whole truth. "Because I needed to see for myself," he said finally. "I needed to know who you were." "And now you do?" "No," he shook his head slowly. "Now I have more questions than ever." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, maybe, or a recognition that he wasn't going to lie to her. That he wasn't going to pretend this was simple. "Come on," he said, jerking his head toward the corridor. "We need to move." She followed, her footsteps silent on the stone floor. Kieran led them through the winding passages, his senses stretched taut, listening for any sign of guards or servants. The estate was massive, a sprawling compound that had been built over generations, and this lower level was a maze of forgotten corridors and unused chambers. Perfect for hiding someone you wanted the world to forget. They'd almost reached the stairs when Celine spoke again. "They'll kill me if they find out you freed me." Kieran didn't slow. "They can try. I'm serious. Your council, they were unanimous. Every single one of them voted for my execution. They said I was a threat to the pack. That my power was too dangerous to control. They're afraid of you," Kieran said flatly. "That's different from you being dangerous." "Is it?" He stopped, turning to face her fully. The torchlight caught the edges of her face, highlighting the sharp line of her cheekbone, the curve of her jaw. She looked fragile in this light. Breakable. But he'd seen what she could do. He'd felt it. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You could have let me die. Could have saved yourself the trouble. But you didn't. You called on power that terrified you. I could hear it in your voice that night, and you used it to protect someone you didn't even know. That's not dangerous, Celine. That's courage." She stared at him, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to argue. But no words came. "They're afraid," Kieran continued, "because they don't understand. Because they've spent so long villainizing the old magic that they can't see past their own fear. But I'm not them. And I'm not going to let them kill you for being what you were born to be. You don't know what I am," she whispered. "You don't know what I'm capable of. Then show me." The words hung between them, a challenge and an invitation all at once. Celine's eyes widened, something like fear flickering through them. Or maybe it was hope. He couldn't tell. I can't, she said. Not here. Not now. The magic, it's not something I can just summon. It comes when it wants to. When it needs to. Then we'll figure it out together, Kieran said. But first, we get you somewhere safe. He turned back toward the stairs, but her voice stopped him. Why do you keep saying we? He looked over his shoulder, meeting her gaze. Because you're not alone anymore. Whether you trust me or not, whether you want my help or not, you're under my protection now. And I don't abandon the people I'm sworn to protect. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, I don't understand you. Good, Kieran replied, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. I'd be worried if you did. I barely understand myself half the time. It surprised a laugh out of her, short, startled, and quickly stifled. But it was real. And the sound of it did something strange to his chest, made something warm unfurl there that he hadn't felt in years. He led them up the stairs, taking them two at a time while Celine struggled to keep pace. He slowed when he noticed, adjusting his stride to match hers. The main level of the estate was quiet. Most of the household would be in the great hall for the evening meal or retired to their chambers. Kieran guided them down a side corridor, away from the populated areas, toward the wing that housed his private quarters. It was risky bringing her here. If anyone saw them, questions would be asked. Rumors would spread. But he needed time. Time to understand what had happened. Time to figure out who'd ordered her imprisonment and why. Time to decide what came next. They reached his chambers without incident. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, ushering Celine inside before closing and locking it behind them. The room was spacious, far more so than that cell. A large bed dominated one wall, draped in furs and thick blankets. A fireplace crackled with low flames, casting warm light across the stone floor. Shelves lined with books and maps covered another wall, and a table near the window held a half-finished meal he'd abandoned hours ago. Celine stood just inside the door, looking around like she'd stepped into another world. Her eyes lingered on the food, and Kieran saw the hunger flash across her face before she could hide it. Eat, he said, gesturing toward the table. There's bread, cheese, some cold meat. It's not much, but... She was already moving before he finished speaking, crossing the room in quick strides that betrayed just how desperate she was. She grabbed the bread first, tearing into it with trembling hands, barely chewing before swallowing. Kieran turned away, giving her privacy, giving her dignity. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkening grounds. The sun had set while they'd been in the lower levels, and now twilight painted everything in shades of purple and blue. In the distance, he could see the lights of the pack houses, warm and glowing against the coming night. His pack. His people. People who'd condemned an innocent woman without trial. Without his knowledge. His hands tightened on the window frame. Kieran. He turned to find Celine watching him, a piece of bread still clutched in her hand. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were clearer now, more focused. Thank you, she said softly. For this. For all of it. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Because the gratitude in her voice, the sheer relief and disbelief, it made him want to tear apart the men who'd put her in that cell with his bare hands. Rest, he said instead. You can take the bed. I'll sleep in the chair. I can't take your bed. You can and you will, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. You've been sleeping on stone for gods know how long. I think you've earned a real bed. She opened her mouth like she wanted to protest, then seemed to think better of it. Where will you be? Right here, he said, nodding toward the chair by the fire. I'm not leaving you alone. Not until I know you're safe. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or confusion. You barely know me. I know enough, Kieran said quietly. I know you saved my life when you had no reason to. I know you prayed for a pack that condemned you. I know you have more courage in your broken body than most warriors I've met." He paused, holding her gaze. "And I know that whatever they told you about yourself, that you're dangerous, that you're a threat, it's a lie." Celine's eyes glistened, tears threatening to spill over. She blinked them back, her throat working as she swallowed hard. "You don't know what you're risking," she whispered. "Protecting me, going against your counsel. They'll see it as betrayal." "Then let them," Kieran said, his voice hard as stone. "I didn't become Alpha King by letting others dictate my choices. And I'm sure as hell not going to start now." Celine woke to warmth. It confused her at first, the softness beneath her body, the weight of furs draped across her shoulders, the faint crackle of a fire somewhere close. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Couldn't reconcile the comfort with the cold stone cell that had become her entire world. Then it came back. The Alpha King. Kieran. His hand reaching into the darkness. His voice, low and certain, telling her she wasn't alone anymore. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. Everything ached, muscles stiff from weeks of immobility, bruises still tender, her ribs sharp reminders of the beatings that had come in those first days. Before they'd decided she wasn't worth the effort. Before they'd simply locked the door and left her to fade away. The room was dim, early morning light filtering through the window in pale gray streaks. The fire had burned down to embers, and in the chair beside it, Kieran sat with his head tipped back, eyes closed, one hand resting on the arm of the chair while the other hung loose at his side. Asleep. Or trying to be. Celine studied him in the quiet. He looked different like this, less commanding, less untouchable. The hard lines of his face had softened slightly, though tension still lived in the set of his jaw, the furrow between his brows. Even in sleep, he couldn't fully let go. She understood that. She'd been the same way once. Before the cell. Before she'd learned that fighting exhaustion only made the darkness press in harder. Her gaze drifted to his hands, strong, scarred, the hands of a warrior who'd earned his position through blood and survival. She remembered those hands from last night. The way they'd steadied her without gripping too tight. The way he'd offered his palm to her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she deserved to be helped. She looked away, her throat tightening. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her without fear or hatred. So long since anyone had spoken to her without venom in their voice. She didn't know what to do with his kindness. Didn't know if she could trust it. Didn't know if she could trust herself not to destroy it. The memories came whether she wanted them or not. They always did in the quiet moments. She'd been 17 when the silver flame first appeared. It had been an accident, at least. That's what she'd told herself for years. A moment of panic when a younger wolf had fallen through the ice on the frozen lake, the water pulling him under before anyone could reach him. She'd been standing on the shore with the others, watching in horror as his head disappeared beneath the surface, his screams cutting off into terrible silence. And something inside her had broken open. She hadn't understood what was happening. Hadn't known what the burning sensation in her chest meant, or why her hands suddenly felt like they were on fire. She'd reached out instinctively, desperately, and the silver flame had poured from her palms like liquid starlight. It had hit the water, and the ice had shattered, not melted, shattered, exploding outward in a wave of steam and light. The boy had been thrown clear, gasping and coughing but alive, deposited on the shore like an offering from the lake itself. Everyone had stared at her, and Celine had known, in that moment, that her life would never be the same. Her parents had tried to hide it at first. Tried to convince the others that it had been a trick of the light, a natural phenomenon, anything but what it actually was. But the whispers had already started. The marked. Old magic. Dangerous. Within a week, the pack elders had called for a trial. She'd stood in front of them, terrified, ashamed, trying desperately to explain that she hadn't meant to do it, that she didn't know how to control it. But they hadn't wanted explanations. They'd wanted her gone. Her own father had been the one to cast the final vote. For the safety of the pack, he'd said, his voice hollow, his eyes refusing to meet hers. We cannot harbor such power among us. It's too great a risk. They'd exiled her that night. No ceremony. No farewell. Just a guard escort to the border and a warning never to return. She'd been 18. Alone. With a power she didn't understand and couldn't control, burning beneath her skin like a caged animal clawing to get out. For 3 years, she'd wandered. Kept to the edges of pack territories, avoided contact with other wolves, learned to survive on her own. She'd taught herself to suppress the flame, to push it down so deep that sometimes she could almost forget it existed. Almost. Then had come the war. The border conflicts that had erupted between neighboring territories, dragging in pack after pack until half the region was consumed by violence. She'd tried to stay out of it. Tried to remain invisible. But the fighting had found her anyway. She'd been scavenging near an abandoned village when she'd heard the sounds of battle, snarls and screams, the clash of claws and teeth. She should have run. Should have put as much distance between herself and the violence as possible. But something had pulled her forward. Some instinct she couldn't name. She'd found him pinned beneath a massive black wolf, blood streaming from wounds in his side and shoulder, his eyes glazed with pain and the certainty of death. She hadn't known who he was then. Hadn't recognized the future Alpha King in the young warrior struggling beneath impossible odds. She'd only known that she couldn't watch him die. The flame had come easier that time. Like it had been waiting for her to stop fighting it. She'd screamed the word live and the silver fire had exploded from her hands, slamming into the black wolf with enough force to send it flying. She'd killed it. She knew that now, though she hadn't stayed to confirm it. The moment Kieran had been free, the moment she'd seen him gasp and roll onto his side, she'd run. Because she'd seen the others coming. Other warriors. Other wolves. And she'd known what would happen if they saw what she'd done. If they saw the silver flame still crackling around her fingers. She'd disappeared into the chaos of the battlefield, letting the rain and the blood wash away any trace of her presence. And when the fighting had finally ended, when the survivors had been counted and the dead laid to rest, she'd listened from the shadows as they'd mourned the fallen Alpha King's heir. She'd believed them. Had carried that guilt with her for 5 years, the belief that her intervention had come too late. That the silver flame had saved him for only moments before death claimed him anyway. Until last night. Until he'd opened that door, and she'd looked up into eyes she'd thought she'd never see again. You're awake. His voice pulled her from the memories. She looked up to find Kieran watching her, his eyes alert despite the exhaustion she could see etched into every line of his face. I didn't mean to wake you, she said quietly. You didn't. He sat forward, running a hand through his dark hair. I wasn't really sleeping. Just thinking. About what to do next. He stood, moving to the window to look out at the grounds. Morning had fully arrived now, pale sunlight spilling across the estate. My council will expect me at the morning assembly. They'll want to discuss border patrols, supply lines, the usual matters. And if they ask about me? They won't, Kieran said, his voice hard. Because they think you're still locked away. They think I don't know. Celine's stomach twisted. You're going to confront them. I'm going to demand answers. He turned to face her, his expression carved from stone. I want to know who ordered your imprisonment. I want to know what evidence they claim to have. And I want to know why they thought they could sentence someone to death without my knowledge or consent. They had evidence, Celine said quietly. Of what I am. What I did. You saved my life. I used forbidden magic, she corrected. Old magic. The kind that's been outlawed in most territories for generations. They saw the silver flame. They knew what it meant. It meant you have power, Kieran said. That's not a crime. It is in their eyes. Celine stood carefully, testing her legs. They held, though she still felt weak, hollowed out. The marked have been feared for centuries. We're unpredictable. Dangerous. Our power doesn't come from the pack bond or the moon, it comes from something older. Something that predates the first shifters. The ancient bloodlines, Karen said slowly. She nodded. Most people think they're myths. Stories told to children to explain the unexplainable. But they're real. The first wolves who walked between worlds, who carried the magic of creation in their veins. She looked down at her hands, at the faint scars that crossed her palms. That magic still runs in some bloodlines. Dormant most of the time. But sometimes it wakes up. Like it did in you. Like it did in me, she confirmed. When I was 17. I didn't ask for it. Didn't want it. But it chose me anyway. And your pack punished you for it. The bitterness in his voice made her look up. His jaw was tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. They were afraid, Celine said softly. I don't blame them. You should. Maybe. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. But fear makes people cruel. It makes them choose safety over justice. And I was a threat to their safety. Or at least, they believed I was. Kieran crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just in front of her. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You are not a threat, he said, his voice low and fierce. You are not dangerous simply for existing. And anyone who made you believe otherwise is a coward and a fool. Celine's breath caught. She'd spent so long internalizing the hatred, the fear, the belief that she was somehow wrong at her very core. Hearing him say those words, hearing the absolute conviction in his voice, it made something crack inside her chest. You don't know me, she whispered. You don't know what I'm capable of. What I might do if I lose control. Then don't lose control, Kieran said simply. Learn to master it. Let me help you. Why? The question burst out of her, desperate and confused. Why do you care? You're the Alpha King. You have an entire pack to worry about. Responsibilities. Duties. Why waste your time on someone like me? Because you saved my life, he said. Because you prayed for people who condemned you. Because when I look at you, I see someone who's been carrying the weight of other people's fear for far too long. He paused, his eyes searching hers. And because I know what it's like to be alone. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Celine stared at him, seeing past the crown and the title for the first time. Seeing the man beneath, scarred, weary, but still standing. Still fighting. You're not alone, she said quietly. You're the Alpha King. You have an entire pack. I have subjects, Kieran interrupted. People who follow me out of duty or fear or tradition. But that's not the same as having someone who sees you. Really sees you. His voice softened. I think you understand that better than most. She did. God's help her, she did. I'm afraid, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. Of the power. Of what it means. Of what I might become if I embrace it instead of fighting it. Then we'll figure it out together, Kieran said, echoing his words from the night before. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Celine. I meant what I said, you're under my protection now. And that means I'm not going anywhere. Celine wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him he was making a mistake, that protecting her would only bring him trouble. But the words wouldn't come. Because for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't alone. And she didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. 3 days passed in careful isolation. Kieran had kept Celine hidden in his chambers, bringing her food himself and deflecting questions from the handful of servants who dared to ask why the Alpha King was suddenly taking meals in private. He'd attended the morning assemblies, sat through tedious council meetings, and listened to his advisors debate border strategies and trade agreements, all while rage simmered beneath his skin like molten iron. None of them had mentioned her. Not once. They thought she was still locked away. Still forgotten. Still waiting to die in the dark. He'd said nothing. Asked nothing. Just watched them with careful eyes, cataloging who avoided his gaze, who seemed nervous, who carried the scent of guilt beneath their polished words. On the fourth morning, he made his decision. "We're leaving," he told Celine as dawn broke across the mountains. She looked up from the book she'd been reading, one of his, a collection of old legends she'd been devouring with quiet intensity. "Leaving where?" "The Thornwood Sanctuary," Kieran said, already pulling supplies from a trunk near his bed. "It's a sacred site. 3 days' ride north, deep in the forest. No one goes there except during the solstice ceremonies." "Why there?" "Because I need answers," he said, meeting her eyes. "About you. About the old magic. About what this all means." He paused, weighing his next words. "And because there's someone there who might be able to help." Celine set the book aside, wariness creeping into her expression. "Someone. An elder. Evelyn. She was my mother's teacher before." He stopped, the memory catching in his throat. "Before my mother died. She left the pack years ago to tend the sanctuary. She's the only one I trust with something like this." "You think she'll know about the marked?" "If anyone does, it's her," Kieran said. "She's spent her life studying the old ways. The bloodlines. The prophecies." The word hung between them like a bell tolled in an empty hall. "Prophecies," Celine repeated slowly. Kieran nodded. "There are stories. Warnings passed down through generations about the return of the ancient power. Most people dismiss them as folklore. But after seeing what you can do," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I need to know if there's more to this. If your power appearing now means something." Celine stood, her movements still careful, still testing the limits of a body that was slowly healing. "And if it does? If there's some prophecy that says I'm supposed to destroy everything or bring about the end of the world, then we'll deal with it," Kieran said simply. "Together." That word again. Together. He used it so easily, like it was the most natural thing in the world to tie his fate to hers. She didn't understand it. Didn't understand him. But she nodded anyway. They left before the household stirred, slipping out through a side gate that led into the forest. Kieran had horses waiting, 2 sturdy mounts already saddled and packed with supplies. He helped Celine up onto the smaller of the two, steadying her when she swayed slightly, her strength still not fully returned. "Tell me if you need to rest," he said, swinging up onto his own horse with practiced ease. "I'll be fine." He shot her a look that said he didn't believe her but wouldn't push. "Not yet." They rode in silence for the first few hours, following narrow trails that wound through dense pine forest. The morning was cold, frost clinging to the undergrowth, their breath misting in the air. Celine pulled her borrowed cloak tighter, grateful for the thick wool even if it was far too large for her frame. The forest changed as they traveled north. The trees grew older, their trunks massive and gnarled, their branches reaching overhead to form a canopy so thick that sunlight barely penetrated. The air smelled different here, richer, heavier, like the earth itself was breathing. By midday, Kieran called a halt near a stream, letting the horses drink while they ate a cold meal of bread and dried meat. Celine sat on a fallen log, watching the water tumble over smooth stones, her mind drifting. "You're quiet," Kieran observed, settling beside her. "I'm always quiet. Not like this." He studied her profile. "What are you thinking about?" She was quiet for a moment, weighing whether to answer honestly. "Finally," she said, "the last time I was in a forest like this, I was running. Trying to put as much distance between myself and civilization as possible. After you saved me." She nodded. "I thought you were dead. Thought I'd used the silver flame for nothing. And I was terrified that someone had seen, that they'd come looking for me." She picked up a small stone, turning it over in her fingers. "So I ran. Deeper into the wilderness. Away from people. Away from anything that could hurt me or that I could hurt." "How long did you run?" 2 years, she said quietly. 2 years of hiding. Hunting. Surviving. I learned to live without a pack. Without connection. I thought if I could just stay invisible, stay small, maybe the power would fade. Maybe I could become normal again. but it didn't fade. No, she tossed the stone into the stream, watching it disappear beneath the current. It just waited, growing stronger, until your council's hunters found me near the southern border 3 months ago. Kieran went very still. Hunters. They were looking for rogues, Celine explained. Wolves who'd been raiding supply lines. I wasn't part of it, but I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. They surrounded me, demanded I identify myself, prove I had pack affiliation. She swallowed hard. I tried to explain, tried to show them I wasn't a threat. But one of them recognized the signs. The way my eyes changed when I was frightened. The shimmer on my skin. They knew you were marked. They knew I was dangerous, she corrected. They took me back to your estate. Threw me in front of your council. And her voice broke slightly. They didn't even pretend to give me a trial. They just looked at me like I was a disease. Something to be eradicated before I could spread. Kieran's hands had curled into fists, his knuckles white. Who led the vote? Does it matter? It matters to me. Celine looked at him, seeing the fury burning in his eyes, not at her, but for her. Counselor Draven, she said finally. He's the one who called for immediate execution. Said that harboring one of the marked was a violation of territorial law. Draven, Kieran repeated, the name like poison on his tongue. Of course it was. You know him? He was my father's advisor before he was mine, Kieran said. Traditional. Inflexible. He believes in the old laws without questioning whether they're just. He stood abruptly, pacing to the stream's edge. He'll answer for this. I swear to you, Celine, he'll answer for what he did. Kieran. No, he turned to face her, his expression fierce. You don't have to defend them. You don't have to make excuses for people who tried to kill you. They were wrong. And when we get back, I'm going to make sure they know it. Celine wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that revenge wouldn't change anything, wouldn't undo the damage. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part that had spent weeks in that cell, cold and starving and alone, wanted them to pay too. Come on, Kieran said, his voice softening. We should keep moving. We'll reach the sanctuary by nightfall if we don't stop again. They rode through the afternoon, the forest growing darker and more primordial with each passing mile. Ancient standing stones began appearing alongside the trail, weathered markers carved with symbols Celine didn't recognize, but that made her skin prickle with awareness. We're getting close, Kieran said, noticing her reaction. Can you feel it? Feel what? The old magic. It's strongest near the sanctuary. The place was built on a convergence point, where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Celine shivered, though she wasn't sure if it was from cold or something else. Because yes, she could feel it. A pull deep in her chest, like a rope tied to her sternum, drawing her forward. The silver flame stirred beneath her skin, recognizing something it had been searching for. They crested a ridge just as the sun began its descent, and Celine's breath caught. The valley below was unlike anything she'd ever seen. A stone circle dominated the center, massive pillars arranged in perfect symmetry, each one easily 3 times the height of a man. They glowed faintly in the dying light, covered in luminescent moss that pulsed with a rhythm like breathing. In the center of the circle stood an altar, and behind it, carved into the cliff face itself, was an entrance, a doorway flanked by more of those strange symbols. But it wasn't the stones or the altar that made Celine's heart race. It was the light. Silver light, exactly like her flame, danced between the pillars in ribbons and spirals, moving with purpose, with intelligence. It painted the air itself, visible even in the fading daylight, and as Celine watched, the ribbons seemed to reach toward her. Calling her. Gods, she breathed. Yeah, Kieran said quietly. I had the same reaction the first time I saw it. They descended into the valley, the horses picking their way carefully down the slope. As they approached the stone circle, an old woman emerged from the cliff entrance, leaning heavily on a gnarled walking stick. Evelyn. She was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles, her hair pure white, and flowing loose down her back. But her eyes were sharp, bright with intelligence and something deeper. Something that made Celine think she could see straight through to the soul. "Kieran," the old woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I wondered when you'd come." "Evelyn." Kieran dismounted, moving to help Celine down. "We need your counsel." The old woman's gaze shifted to Celine, and her expression changed, surprise flickering across her features, followed by something that looked almost like reverence. "The Silverborn," Evelyn whispered. "After all these years. She's finally come." Celine felt the blood drain from her face. "What did you just call me?" Evelyn smiled, sad and knowing. "Come inside, child. There's much you need to understand. Much that has been hidden from you." She turned, gesturing toward the cliff entrance with her walking stick. "The stars have been waiting for you. And so have I." Kieran moved to Celine's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm right here." Together, they followed Evelyn into the sanctuary. The interior was carved from living rock, a cathedral of stone lit by more of that luminescent moss. But it wasn't empty. The walls were covered in carvings, thousands of them, depicting scenes Celine didn't understand. Wolves with wings. Flames that formed shapes like faces. And everywhere, again and again, the image of a woman with silver light pouring from her hands. "The prophecy of the Silverborn," Evelyn said, stopping before the largest carving. "Written 3,000 years ago by the first seers. They spoke of a time when the world would fracture, when the old magic would begin to fade and the balance between life and death would tip toward darkness." She turned to look at Celine. "They said that in that time a child would be born carrying the flame of creation itself. The Silverborn. The one who would either restore the balance or shatter it completely." Celine's legs felt weak. "No, I'm not. Look at your hands, child." Celine did, and gasped. Her palms were glowing, not brightly, but unmistakably, silver light seeping through her skin like she was full of stars trying to escape. "The sanctuary recognizes you," Evelyn said gently. "The old magic recognizes its own. You can deny it all you want, but the truth remains." She moved closer, her ancient eyes searching Celine's face. "You are the Silverborn. And your power awakening now, after centuries of dormancy in your bloodline, is not an accident. It's a warning." "A warning of what?" Kieran demanded. Evelyn's expression darkened. "That the darkness is rising. That the fracture the prophecy spoke of has already begun." She looked between them. "And that the choice she makes in the days to come will determine whether this world survives or falls into endless night." The silver light between the pillars outside suddenly flared brighter, and Celine felt the flame in her chest surge in response, not painful, but overwhelming, like her body couldn't contain everything it was trying to tell her. She stumbled, and Kieran caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. But as Celine looked at the carvings on the wall, at the countless depictions of the woman with silver flame, at the scenes of creation and destruction dancing side by side, she wondered if anyone could catch her. If anyone could save her from what she was meant to become. They stayed in the sanctuary through the night. Evelyn had prepared a small chamber for them, 2 pallets laid out near a fire pit, the walls still covered in those ancient carvings that seemed to watch Celine's every movement. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those images. The woman with silver flame. The world splitting apart beneath her feet. The choice that would determine everything. Kieran sat against the wall nearby, his eyes closed, but his breathing too controlled to be truly asleep. "Keeping watch. Always keeping watch." "You can ask," Celine said quietly into the darkness. "Whatever you're thinking. Just ask." His eyes opened, finding hers in the firelight. "Do you believe her? What Evelyn said about the prophecy?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Celine admitted. 3 months ago, I was just trying to survive. Trying to stay hidden. And now I'm supposed to be some kind of chosen one? Meant to save or destroy the world. She laughed, but it came out bitter. It's insane. Maybe, Kieran said. Or maybe you've been running from who you really are for so long that you forgot you were meant for something more than just survival. The words hit harder than she expected. She looked away, staring at the flames dancing in the pit. I'm scared, she whispered. Of the power. Of what it wants from me. Of what I might do if I stop fighting it. Kieran was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved, crossing the small space to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You know what scares me, he said. Not your power. Not the prophecy. Not even the idea that you might be destined for something I can't fully understand. He paused. What scares me is the thought that you might let fear win. That you might spend your whole life running from yourself instead of becoming who you were meant to be. Celine turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her, steady, unwavering, full of a certainty she didn't feel. And who do you think I'm meant to be? I don't know, Kieran said honestly. But I want to find out. And I want to be there when you do. The air between them felt charged, electric. Celine's breath caught as she realized how close they were, how easy it would be to close the distance. How much she wanted to. But before either of them could move, a sound split the night. A horn. Long and low and urgent. Kieran was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the blade at his hip. That's a warning call. Celine scrambled up, her heart pounding. From where? The estate. His face had gone hard, all traces of softness vanished. Something's happened. They found Evelyn already in the main chamber, her ancient face grim as she stared out toward the stone circle. The silver light that had been so beautiful the night before now flickered erratically, pulsing like a wounded heartbeat. They're coming, the old woman said without turning around. Who? Kieran demanded. Your council. Your warriors. They've discovered she's gone. Evelyn finally looked at them, and there was sorrow in her eyes. Someone told them about the sanctuary. About where you'd bring her. Ice flooded Celine's veins. How long do we have? They left at dawn. They'll be here within the hour. Kieran cursed, his mind already working through options. We can take the eastern pass. Circle back through. No, Evelyn interrupted. You cannot run from this, boy. The confrontation was always inevitable. The only question is whether you face it here, on sacred ground, or out there where they can isolate you from the old magic's protection. Protection? Celine's voice came out sharper than she intended. What protection? I can barely control my power. If they attack, if I lose control, then the sanctuary will guide you, Evelyn said firmly. This place was built by the first Silverborn child. Her essence lives in these stones, in the very earth beneath your feet. If you open yourself to it, it will show you what you need to know. And if I can't? Then they will kill you, the old woman said bluntly. And him. And everything the prophecy promised will die with you. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kieran moved to the entrance, his eyes scanning the valley below. Celine joined him, and her stomach dropped. Torches. Dozens of them, moving through the forest like a river of fire. The sound of horses and raised voices carried on the wind, growing closer with each passing moment. How many? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 30. Maybe more. Kieran's jaw was tight. They brought an entire company. To capture one woman. To capture a threat they don't understand, he corrected. Fear makes people dangerous, Celine. Makes them willing to do things they'd never consider otherwise. She could see their faces now as they emerged from the tree line. Council members she vaguely recognized from that brief, terrible appearance before her imprisonment. Warriors in full armor, weapons drawn. And at the front, mounted on a huge gray stallion, was a man whose cold eyes she remembered all too well. Draven. The counselor who'd called for her execution. The one who'd looked at her like she was something to be scraped off his boot. He looked even more severe in the torchlight, his face carved from granite, his posture radiating authority and contempt in equal measure. Alpha King. His voice boomed across the valley. We know you're in there. We know you've taken the prisoner. Surrender her now and there will be no consequences for your misguided compassion. Kieran's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Stay behind me, he murmured to Celine. Kieran, just stay behind me. He strode out of the sanctuary entrance, moving through the stone circle with his head high, every inch the Alpha King, despite the impossible odds. Celine followed, her heart hammering, Evelyn close behind. The warriors shifted when they appeared, weapons rising, but Draven held up a hand to stop them. Your Majesty, the counselor said, his tone dripping with false deference. I'm relieved to see you're unharmed. We were concerned that the prisoner had somehow coerced or enchanted you. The only thing I'm enchanted by, Kieran said coldly, is the absolute audacity you've displayed. Imprisoning someone without trial. Sentencing them to death without my knowledge or consent. Lying to your Alpha King for months. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Several looked uncomfortable. Draven's expression didn't change. We acted in the best interests of the pack. The woman is marked. She carries forbidden magic. Allowing her to live poses an unacceptable risk too. She saved my life. The words cut through the air like a blade. Several warriors exchanged glances. Draven's eyes narrowed. What did you say? 5 years ago. Blackwater Ridge. The ambush that nearly killed me. Kieran took a step forward, his voice carrying across the valley. She was the one who saved me. The mysterious warrior you all searched for. The one who disappeared into the storm. He gestured toward Celine. It was her. And you repaid that sacrifice by locking her in a cell to die. That changes nothing, Draven said sharply. Old magic is old magic. It doesn't matter what she did in the past. What she is now is a danger to every wolf in this territory. She's not dangerous, Kieran growled. She's powerful. And you're terrified that power doesn't belong to you. I'm terrified, Draven countered, that you've allowed sentiment and gratitude to cloud your judgment. That you've forgotten your duty is to protect the pack, not to defend creatures that threaten it. Creatures? The word came from Celine before she could stop it. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Kieran despite his warning. Is that what you see when you look at me? A creature. Draven's lip curled. I see exactly what you are. An abomination. A corruption of natural order. The marked have been exiled from civilized territories for generations because your kind brings nothing but chaos and death. My kind saved your Alpha King's life, Celine shot back, anger burning through her fear. My kind prayed for a pack that condemned her. Your kind murdered 17 wolves during the last uprising, Draven interrupted, his voice like iron. Burned them alive with silver flame. Women. Children. Innocents who'd done nothing but have the misfortune of being nearby when one of the marked lost control. Celine felt the words like physical blows. I wasn't. It doesn't matter which marked it was, Draven continued relentlessly. What matters is that your power is unstable, uncontrollable. And the prophecy that old fool behind you keeps muttering about? It doesn't promise salvation. It promises a choice, and one wrong decision means the end of everything we've built. Then help her make the right choice, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating through his frame. Teach her. Guide her. Don't condemn her for something she hasn't done. We cannot take that risk. You mean you won't, Kieran corrected. Because it's easier to kill her than to confront your own fear. Draven's patience finally snapped. I have indulged this conversation out of respect for your position. But my patience has limits. He raised his hand, and the warriors behind him moved forward as one. Stand aside, Your Majesty. Or we will remove you along with the threat. You would threaten your Alpha King? Kieran's voice dropped to something dangerous. I would protect my pack, Draven said. Even from its own leader, if necessary. The warriors formed a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Celine counted the odds, 30 armed wolves against 2 and an elderly woman. Even if Kieran was a formidable fighter, even if she called on her power, the numbers were impossible. Last chance, Draven said. Surrender the marked, or face the consequences. Kieran's hand moved his sword. Come and take her. Everything happened at once. The warriors surged forward. Kieran's blade sang free of its sheath. And Celine felt the silver flame explode inside her chest, responding to the threat, to the fear, to the desperate need to protect the one person who'd shown her kindness. No, Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos. Child, not like this. You must control it. But control was a distant memory. The flame poured from Celine's hands in torrents, slamming into the approaching warriors and sending them flying backward. She heard screams, saw bodies hit the ground, smelled burning flesh and ozone, and couldn't stop. The power was too much, too vast, like trying to hold back an ocean with her bare hands. It wanted out, wanted to consume everything in its path, wanted to burn away every threat until nothing remained but ash and memory. Celine. Kieran's voice, desperate and close. Look at me. Focus on my voice. She tried. Gods, she tried. But the flame had its own will now, its own hunger. It spread across the valley like wildfire, igniting the grass, cracking the ancient stones, making the very air shimmer with heat. More warriors fell. Some fled. Others tried to press forward, only to be thrown back by walls of silver fire. And through it all, Draven sat on his horse, watching with cold calculation. You see, he called out, his voice carrying over the roar of flames. You see what she is? What she'll always be. Uncontrollable. Destructive. A danger to everyone around her. Celine, please. Kieran was in front of her now, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes locked on hers. Come back. I know you're in there. Come back to me. His words cut through the chaos like a lifeline. Celine grabbed onto them, used them to pull herself back from the edge, to wrestle the flame back under control. Slowly, painfully, the fire began to recede. The silence that followed was deafening. Celine looked around at the destruction she caused. The scorched earth. The wounded warriors being helped to their feet by their companions. The fear in every single face turned toward her. Including Kieran's. No, not fear. Something else. Something that looked almost like awe. You see now, Draven said into the quiet, his voice sharp with triumph. You see what she's capable of. What she'll do to all of us if given the chance. Kieran turned to face the counselor, and his expression was colder than Celine had ever seen it. I see, he said quietly, that she protected herself when attacked. That she showed more restraint than you and your warriors showed when you imprisoned an innocent woman. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. And I see that I can no longer trust my own counsel to act with honor or justice. You're making a mistake, Draven warned. No, Kieran said. You made the mistake. And now you're going to leave. Take your warriors. Go back to the estate. And when I return, we're going to have a very long conversation about what leadership actually means. And if we refuse? Kieran's smile was sharp as broken glass. Then you'll find out exactly how dangerous your Alpha King can be when you threaten someone under his protection. For a long moment, no one moved. The warriors looked to Draven, waiting for his command. The counselor stared at Kieran with barely concealed fury. Finally, he jerked his reins, turning his horse away. This isn't over, he said. The pack will hear about this. About your choice to defend her over them. And they will demand justice. Then they'll get it, Kieran said. Just not the kind you're expecting. Draven rode away without another word, his warriors following. Within minutes, the torches had disappeared back into the forest, leaving only ash and scorched earth behind. Celine collapsed. Kieran caught her before she hit the ground, lowering them both carefully to their knees. She was shaking, exhausted, the power drain leaving her hollow and weak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't. I tried to control it, but—" "You did control it," Kieran said firmly, his arms tightening around her. "You could have killed them all. Could have let the flame consume everything. But you didn't. You pulled it back." "But Draven's right," Celine said, tears streaming down her face. "I am dangerous. I am uncontrollable. And if I stay with you, I'll only bring you more trouble. More enemies. Maybe even—" "Stop." Kieran cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. I don't care what Draven thinks. I don't care what the council thinks. I care about you. About who you are beneath the power and the fear and the prophecy." His voice softened. "And I'm not letting you go. Not now. Not ever." Behind them, Evelyn spoke quietly. "The clash was necessary," the old woman said. "Painful, but necessary. She needed to feel the full extent of her power, to understand what she's truly capable of." She moved closer, resting a weathered hand on Celine's shoulder. "But now comes the harder part, child. Now you must learn to master it, to make it yours instead of letting it control you." Celine looked between them, the Alpha King who'd chosen her over his council, and the ancient seer who believed she was meant for something impossible. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "Then we'll learn together," Kieran said, echoing his promise yet again. And despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the certainty that this would only get worse before it got better, Celine found herself believing him, found herself hoping. They stayed at the sanctuary for 5 more days. Evelyn had insisted. The pack would be in turmoil after what had happened, she'd said. Rumors would spread. Fear would fester. Better to let the storm break in their absence than walk back into the heart of it unprepared. Kieran had argued at first, his sense of duty demanding he return immediately to face the consequences. But Celine had seen the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of leadership that had been crushing him long before she'd entered his life. And when Evelyn had fixed him with that ancient, knowing stare, he'd finally relented. 5 days, he'd agreed. Then we go back. Together. Those 5 days changed everything. Evelyn worked with Celine during the daylight hours, teaching her meditation techniques passed down through generations of seers. Teaching her to feel the silver flame not as a foreign entity, but as an extension of herself, a part of her soul given physical form. "The power doesn't come from outside you," the old woman explained as they sat within the stone circle, silver light dancing around them. "It comes from within. From the bloodline that runs through your veins. From the first Silverborn who walked these lands before the packs even existed." "Then why does it feel so alien?" Celine asked, frustrated after another failed attempt to summon the flame without losing control. "Why does it feel like something else is moving through me?" "Because you've spent your whole life being told it was wrong," Evelyn said gently. "Being taught to fear it, suppress it, hide it. Your power learned to protect itself by becoming separate from your conscious mind. But it was never meant to be separate. It was meant to be integrated. Part of who you are." "How do I integrate something that nearly killed 30 wolves?" "You didn't kill them," Evelyn pointed out. "You could have. Easily. But at the last moment, you chose restraint. That's not the action of someone who can't control their power. That's the action of someone learning to." Celine wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that she wasn't just a walking disaster waiting to happen. But doubt clung to her like a second skin. In the evenings, after Evelyn retired to her meditation chamber, Kieran would join Celine by the fire. They'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. About his childhood as the heir to the Alpha King title, the pressure and isolation that came with it. About her years of wandering, the loneliness that had become her constant companion. "I always envied the pack wolves," Celine admitted one night, watching flames dance in the pit. "The way they belonged to something bigger than themselves. The way they had purpose, community, family." She paused. "I didn't realize how heavy that belonging could be. How much you have to sacrifice for it." It's a cage sometimes, Kieran said quietly. Gilded, maybe, but still a cage. Every decision scrutinized. Every action judged against tradition and expectation. He looked at her, firelight catching in his dark eyes. Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I'd been born to a different life. If I could have chosen my own path instead of inheriting one. You'd still be you, Celine said with certainty. Leadership isn't just about the title. It's about who you are at your core. The way you see people. The way you fight for what's right even when it costs you. She smiled slightly. You would have found a way to lead, one way or another. And you would have found a way to survive, Kieran replied. No matter what they threw at you. That's what I see when I look at you, Celine. Not danger. Not corruption. Just strength. The kind that doesn't break even when the whole world tries to shatter it. The words settled between them, warm and intimate. Celine felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I'm not as strong as you think, she said softly. You're stronger, Kieran countered. You just don't see it yet. On the third night, they walked together through the forest surrounding the sanctuary. The moon was full, casting silver light through the canopy, and Celine felt the pull of it in her blood, that ancient connection between wolves and the moon that transcended pack bonds. Do you ever shift? Kieran asked, navigating a fallen log with easy grace. Celine shook her head. Not since I was exiled. I was afraid that if I let the wolf out, I wouldn't be able to control it. That the silver flame would merge with the shift and create something monstrous. Or something magnificent, Kieran suggested. She shot him a skeptical look. You have a lot more faith in me than I have in myself. Someone has to. He stopped walking, turning to face her. You've spent so long being afraid of your own power that you forgot it's part of you. Not some curse or disease. Part of who you were always meant to be. The Silverborn, Celine said, the title still feeling foreign on her tongue. If that's what you are, then yes. But also just. Celine. A woman who survived impossible odds. Who chose compassion over bitterness. Who saved a stranger's life because it was the right thing to do. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. That's who I see. That's who I trust. Celine's breath caught. They were standing so close now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the rapid pulse at his throat. Close enough to notice the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. Kieran, she whispered, not sure if it was a warning or an invitation. Tell me to stop, he said quietly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll step back. I'll never mention it again. She should tell him to stop. Should remind him that she was dangerous, that getting close to her would only bring him pain. Should protect him from herself the way no one had ever protected her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes falling closed as his thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. I can't promise I won't hurt you, she said, her voice barely audible. I can't promise the power won't. I'm not asking for promises, Kieran interrupted gently. I'm just asking for this. Right here, right now. No prophecies. No counsels. No fear. Just us. When he kissed her, it was soft, tentative, like he was afraid she might shatter beneath his touch. But Celine felt anything but fragile. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, every nerve ending singing with awareness, with want, with something that felt dangerously close to hope. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to fist in his shirt, pulling him closer. The silver flame stirred in response, but it didn't rage or threaten to consume. It simply warmed. Like it recognized something in him. Like it approved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I see you, he murmured, repeating the words he'd spoken in that cell what felt like a lifetime ago. All of you. And I'm not afraid. Celine's throat tightened with emotion. You should be. Probably, he agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. But I've never been very good at doing what I should. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, and for the first time since her power had awakened, Celine felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this impossible journey. On the fifth morning, Evelyn called them both to the stone circle. The old woman looked tired, more ancient than usual, but her eyes were clear and focused. She held something in her weathered hands, a pendant on a silver chain, carved with symbols that seemed to shift and move in the light. "This belonged to the first Silverborn," Evelyn said, holding it out to Celine. "It was meant to be passed down through the bloodline, but it was lost centuries ago. I found it buried beneath the altar 3 days ago. It was waiting for you." Celine took it carefully, feeling warmth pulse through the metal the moment it touched her skin. The silver flame responded immediately, recognizing the pendant, singing in harmony with whatever power resided in the carved stone. "What does it do?" she asked. "It focuses your power," Evelyn explained. "Gives you an anchor when the flame threatens to overwhelm you. It won't make you invulnerable, won't make the hard choices any easier. But it will help you maintain control when you need it most." Celine fastened it around her neck, feeling the pendant settle against her sternum like it had always belonged there. "There's something else," Evelyn said, her expression growing grave. She looked at Kieran. "The confrontation with your council. It's accelerated things. Forces that have been sleeping are now awake and watching." "What kind of forces?" Kieran demanded. "The kind that have waited centuries for the Silverborn to return," Evelyn said. "The kind that see her as either salvation or threat. There are wolves who will want to use her power for their own ends. Others who will want to destroy it before it can threaten their control." She paused. "And there are older things. Things that predate the pacts. Things that have their own interest in whether the prophecy is fulfilled." A chill ran down Celine's spine. "You're saying we have enemies we don't even know about yet?" "I'm saying the storm is coming," Evelyn corrected. "What happened with Draven was just the first clash. But there will be others. Worse ones. And you need to be ready." "How do we prepare for enemies we can't see?" Celine asked. "By becoming stronger," the old woman said simply. "By learning to trust each other completely. By accepting that the path ahead will demand sacrifices neither of you can imagine yet." She looked between them, her ancient eyes sad. "The Silverborn's destiny has always been written in fire and blood. The question is not whether you'll face darkness. The question is whether you'll face it together or let it tear you apart." Kieran moved to stand beside Celine, his hand finding hers and gripping tight. "Together," he said firmly. Celine looked at him, this alpha king who'd risked everything for her, who'd chosen her over his council, who'd seen past her power to the broken woman underneath. And she felt something shift inside her. Something that felt like courage. "Together," she echoed. Evelyn smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then may the first wolves watch over you both. Because you're going to need all the protection you can get." They left the sanctuary at midday, the horses rested and ready, supplies packed. Celine wore the Silverborn pendant beneath her clothes, feeling its steady warmth against her skin. A reminder. An anchor. As they rode away from the stone circle, Celine looked back one last time. The silver light still danced between the pillars, but it seemed dimmer now. Almost mournful. Like it knew what was coming. Like it was already grieving. Kieran caught her expression and squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we face it together. You're not alone anymore, Celine. And you never will be again." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that their connection, this fragile, beautiful thing growing between them, would be enough to weather whatever storm was coming. But as they descended from the mountains toward the estate below, Celine couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn's warning had been more than just caution. It had been prophecy. And prophecies, she was learning, always came true, just never in the way you expected. They saw the smoke before they reached the estate. Black columns rising against the afternoon sky, thick and oily, carrying on the wind. Kieran urged his horse faster, Celine struggling to keep pace, both of them silent with dread. The main gates stood open, unguarded. That alone told them something was catastrophically wrong. The Alpha King's estate was never left unprotected, never left vulnerable. It was a fortress, a symbol of power and security that had stood for generations. But now the courtyard was empty, silent except for the crackle of flames and the distant sound of shouting. Kieran dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand already on his sword. Celine slid down from her horse, her legs unsteady, the silver flame awakening in her chest like it sensed danger before her conscious mind could process it. "Stay close," Kieran ordered, moving toward the main hall. They found the first body near the fountain. A young guard, barely old enough to have earned his position. His throat had been torn open, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. Celine's stomach lurched, but she forced herself to keep moving. More bodies littered the path to the hall. Guards, servants, people who'd had nothing to do with politics or prophecies or power struggles. People who'd simply been in the wrong place when violence erupted. "Gods," Kieran breathed, his face carved from stone. What happened here? They found their answer in the Great Hall. The massive wooden doors had been torn from their hinges, splintered and broken. Inside, the hall was chaos, overturned tables, shattered glass, bloodstains painting the stone floor in abstract patterns. And in the center of it all, standing on the raised platform where the Alpha King's throne sat, was Draven. But he wasn't alone. A dozen warriors flanked him, all wearing expressions of grim determination. And kneeling before the platform, bound and bloodied, were at least 20 wolves, pack members who'd remained loyal to Kieran. Celine recognized some of them. Younger council members. The captain of the guard who'd always treated her decently during her brief time in custody. Hostages. "Your Majesty," Draven called out, his voice echoing through the ruined hall. "How good of you to finally return. We've been waiting." Kieran stepped forward, every line of his body radiating controlled fury. "What have you done?" "What you refused to do," Draven replied calmly. "I protected the pack. From threats both external," his gaze slid to Celine, "and internal." "You've committed treason," Kieran said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Attacked your own people. Murdered innocent wolves." "Innocent?" Draven laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "There are no innocents when survival is at stake. These wolves chose to stand with you, to defend your misguided attachment to that creature. They made their choice, and now they'll face the consequences." Celine felt the silver flame surge, responding to her rage and fear. Kieran must have sensed it because his hand shot out, gripping her wrist in warning. "Not yet," his touch said. "Wait. What do you want?" Kieran demanded. "What I've always wanted," Draven said. "A pack free from corruption. Free from the taint of old magic and the weakness of leaders who let sentiment cloud their judgment." He gestured to the bound wolves. "Give us the marked. Let us finish what should have been done months ago. Do that, and these wolves live. Your authority remains intact. Order is restored." "You mean your order?" Kieran shot back. "Order is order," Draven replied. "The pack needs strength. Decisiveness. Not a king who abandons his people for weeks to chase after prophecies and protect abominations." "She saved my life. And now she'll be the death of us all," Draven countered. "Can't you see it? The destruction she caused at the sanctuary was just the beginning. The more she uses that power, the more unstable it becomes. How long before she loses control completely? Before she burns down everything we've built?" "That won't happen," Kieran said firmly. "You can't promise that. You don't know what she's capable of." Draven's expression hardened. "But I do. I've spent my life studying the histories. The accounts of what the marked have done when their power overwhelms them. Entire territories reduced to ash. Hundreds dead. Families destroyed." He pointed at Celine. "She is a weapon. Unstable and uncontrollable. And weapons like that need to be dismantled before they detonate." Celine wanted to argue. wanted to defend herself against the accusations. But the words stuck in her throat because part of her, the part that had spent 5 years running from herself, wondered if he was right. Last chance, Draven said. Give her to us. Or watch your loyal wolves die one by one. One of the warriors grabbed a bound wolf, a young woman Celine recognized as a kitchen worker, and dragged her forward. A blade appeared at her throat, and the woman whimpered, tears streaming down her face. No! The cry tore from Celine before she could stop it. Don't hurt her. Please. She has nothing to do with this. Then make the right choice, Draven said coldly. Surrender yourself. Save these innocent lives. Celine took a step forward, but Kieran's grip on her wrist tightened almost painfully. Don't, he growled. Don't you dare. He'll kill them, Celine whispered, her eyes locked on the terrified woman. All of them. Because of me. He'll kill them anyway, Kieran said. The moment you surrender, he loses his leverage. These wolves are already dead in his mind. He's just using them to manipulate you. Draven's smile was cold. Your king knows me so well. But tell me, Celine, are you willing to bet their lives on his assessment of my character? The silver flame roared inside her chest, demanding release, demanding she burn away this threat like she'd done with the warriors at the sanctuary. But she remembered what had happened then. The loss of control. The terror on Kieran's face when he'd thought she might not come back. If she unleashed that power here, in this enclosed space, with hostages and allies mixed together, she'd kill everyone. Friend and enemy alike. Time's up, Draven said, nodding to the warrior. The blade began to press into the woman's throat. And something inside Celine snapped. Not the silver flame. Something else. Something deeper and more primal than magic or prophecy. The part of her that had survived exile and loneliness and years of believing she was a monster. The part that refused to let innocent people die because of her existence. Wait, she said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. She pulled free of Kieran's grip. I'll go with you. I'll surrender. Just let them go. All of them. Celine, no. It's the only way, she said, finally meeting Kieran's eyes. And what she saw there nearly broke her. Anguish. Fury. Desperation. Love. You can't do this, he said, his voice cracking. I won't let you. You don't have a choice, she replied softly. Neither of us do. She walked forward, each step feeling like she was wading through deep water. The silver flame screamed in protest, begging her to fight, to resist, to burn everything to the ground rather than surrender. But she pushed it down, locked it away, and kept moving. Draven watched her approach with something like satisfaction in his cold eyes. A wise decision, he said. Perhaps there's hope for you yet. Celine stopped at the base of the platform. Let them go first. Let me see them leave safely. Then I'm yours. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then he gestured, and the warriors began cutting the bonds of the hostages. They stumbled to their feet, confusion and relief warring on their faces. Go, Celine told them. Get out of here. Find somewhere safe. The young kitchen worker, the one who'd been seconds from death, grabbed Celine's hand as she passed. Thank you, she whispered, tears still streaming. Thank you. Then they were gone, fleeing through the broken doors, leaving only Celine and Kieran facing Draven and his warriors. Now, Draven said. Come up here. Kneel. Celine climbed the steps, her heart hammering. She could feel Kieran's gaze on her back, could hear him moving closer despite everything. She knelt before the throne, the seat that should have been Kieran's, now occupied by a traitor. Draven stood, looking down at her with contempt. Do you know what we're going to do with you? Kill me, Celine said flatly. Like you always planned. Eventually, Draven agreed. But first, we're going to make an example. Show the entire pack what happens when old magic is allowed to fester. When weakness masquerades as compassion. He reached down, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back. They'll watch you burn, Silverborn. And they'll learn to fear what you represent. To reject it. 2. He never finished the sentence. Because Kieran moved. Faster than Celine had ever seen him move, the Alpha King was across the hall and up the platform steps, his sword already drawn. He drove the blade through the warrior closest to Draven before anyone could react, then spun and kicked another back into the throne. Get away from her, he snarled. Draven released Celine, shoving her aside as he drew his own weapon. The remaining warriors surged forward, and suddenly the hall exploded into violence. Kieran fought like something possessed, all controlled fury and deadly precision. But there were too many. Even as he cut down 2 more warriors, 3 others surrounded him, forcing him back. Celine scrambled to her feet, watching in horror as they drove Kieran to his knees, blades at his throat and back. Enough, Draven roared. The fighting stopped, everyone frozen in place. You see, he said, turning to address the warriors. You see how deeply the corruption runs? He would throw away everything, his crown, his honor, his life, for her. For this creature. She's not a creature, Kieran ground out, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. She's the reason you're going to die, Draven interrupted. I didn't want it to come to this. I hoped you'd see reason. But you've left me no choice. He raised his sword, pointing it at Kieran's chest. The council will understand. We'll accept that you were killed trying to protect a threat. That your sacrifice, while tragic, was necessary to preserve the pack. No. Celine lunged forward, but 2 warriors grabbed her, holding her back. Don't. Please. I'll do anything. You already did, Draven said coldly. You surrendered. But it wasn't enough. It will never be enough as long as he's alive to defend you. The sword began its descent. And Celine felt something inside her shatter. Not the silver flame. Something else. The last wall she'd built around her power, around the truth of what she was. The final barrier between control and chaos. The pendant at her throat blazed to life, burning hot enough to sear her skin. And the silver flame exploded outward, not wild, not uncontrolled, but focused with absolute precision. It hit the warriors holding Kieran first, throwing them back without burning them. Then it spread across the hall in a wave of pure light, slamming into every one of Draven's supporters and pinning them to the walls like insects on display. Celine stood at the center of it all, silver fire pouring from her hands, her eyes blazing with power that was finally, completely, hers to command. You want to see what I'm capable of, she said, her voice carrying an echo that seemed to come from somewhere ancient. You want to know what the Silverborn can do? The flames intensified, and the warriors began to scream. Celine, stop. Kieran's voice cut through her rage. He was on his feet now, moving toward her despite the inferno raging around them. Don't do this. Don't become what they fear. They'll never stop, she said, tears streaming down her face even as the power sang through her veins. They'll hunt me. Hunt us. Forever. Then let them, Kieran said, finally reaching her, his hands cupping her face despite the silver fire dancing across her skin. Let them try. But don't lose yourself to this. Don't give them the satisfaction of proving them right. I can't, her voice broke. I can't let you die for me. And I can't let you destroy yourself to save me, Kieran replied fiercely. We're in this together, remember? That means we fight together. We survive together. We make the hard choices together. His forehead pressed against hers. But we don't become monsters. We don't give up our humanity. Not for anything. The silver flame wavered, responding to his words, to his presence. Celine looked past him at Draven, still pinned to the wall, terror finally breaking through his cold facade. At the warriors who'd followed him, who'd hurt innocent people in the name of fear and tradition. She could kill them all. Right now. End the threat permanently. But Kieran was right. That path led nowhere good. Led only to proving everything they'd said about her. Slowly, painfully, she pulled the power back, drew it into herself until only a faint glow remained around her hands. The warriors collapsed, gasping and shaking but alive. Draven staggered forward, his face pale. You should have killed us. Because I swear to you, this isn't over. I'll spend every day of my life making sure the pack knows what you are, what you'll become. And when they finally rise up against you, then they'll have to go through me, Kieran interrupted coldly. Guards. The doors burst open, and a flood of loyal warriors poured in, reinforcements Selene hadn't known were coming. They surrounded Draven and his followers, weapons drawn. Arrest them, Kieran commanded. All of them. Charges of treason, murder, attempted assassination of the Alpha King. They'll stand trial for what they've done. As the guards moved to comply, Draven locked eyes with Selene one last time. This isn't over, Silverborn, he said quietly. The prophecy speaks of a choice, salvation, or destruction. And you've just shown everyone which path you'll choose when pushed to the edge. Then he was gone, dragged away with his warriors, leaving Selene and Kieran standing in the ruined hall surrounded by blood and ash and the smoking remains of everything that had been. Kieran pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will. It's over, he murmured against her hair. It's finally over. But Selene knew better. She'd felt something when the silver flame had consumed her. Something ancient and vast stirring in the depths of her power. And it had whispered a truth she couldn't ignore. This was only the beginning. The trial lasted 3 days. Draven and his followers were sentenced to exile, stripped of their titles, their pack bonds severed, cast out into the territories beyond the borders. It was a mercy Selene hadn't expected Kieran to show, but he'd explained it with cold pragmatism. Dead, they become martyrs, he'd said, watching from the throne as the council delivered their verdict. Exiled, they become a warning. A reminder of what happens when ambition overtakes duty. But exile didn't mean the threat was gone. Reports came daily of dissent spreading through the outer settlements. Wolves who'd heard about the Silverborn. About the silver flame that had nearly consumed the Great Hall. About an Alpha King who'd chosen one woman over the safety of his pack. Fear was a poison, and it was spreading. Selene felt it every time she walked through the estate. The way conversations stopped when she passed. The way people averted their eyes, making signs of protection when they thought she wasn't looking. She'd gone from prisoner to protected guest, but in the minds of many, she was still a threat. Still something to be feared. On the 7th night after their return, Selene stood on the balcony outside Kieran's chambers, staring out at the distant forest. The moon was waning, its light pale and cold, and somewhere in that darkness, she knew enemies were gathering. Draven had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. You're thinking too loud, Kieran said from behind her. She turned to find him in the doorway, shirtless, his hair mussed from sleep he clearly hadn't been getting. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and new lines had appeared at the corners of his mouth, the weight of leadership crushing down harder than ever. I'm thinking about leaving, Selene admitted quietly. Kieran went very still. What? It would solve everything, she continued, turning back to the forest. The pack fears me. They don't trust you because of me. If I just disappeared, went somewhere far from here, let you rebuild without me as a constant reminder of. No. The word was flat. Final. Kieran. I said no. He crossed the balcony in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders and turning her to face him. You don't get to sacrifice yourself to make other people comfortable with their fear. You don't get to run away because staying is hard. People died because of me, Selene said, her voice breaking. In the hall. In the fighting. Because Draven used me as an excuse to. Draven killed those people, Kieran interrupted fiercely. Not you. He made the choice to betray his pack. To murder innocents. That's on him, not you. And I won't let you carry guilt that belongs to someone else. But if I stayed, there will be more, Selene insisted. More fighting. More death. The prophecy said. The prophecy said you'd face a choice, Kieran reminded her. Salvation or destruction. But it didn't say which one you'd choose. It didn't say that staying meant destruction or that leaving meant salvation. His hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Maybe the real choice isn't about leaving or staying. Maybe it's about who you become in the face of fear. Before Celine could respond, a sound split the night. A howl. Long and mournful and wrong. Kieran's head snapped toward the forest, his whole body going taut with tension. More howls joined the first, dozens of them, rising from the darkness like a tide of despair. Something's wrong, he said, already moving back into the chambers to grab his sword and shirt. Celine followed, the silver flame awakening in her chest with an urgency that made her breath catch. What is it? I don't know. But that's the alarm call. Only used when. An explosion rocked the estate. The windows shattered inward, showering them with glass. Kieran threw himself over Celine, shielding her as another explosion followed, then another. The whole building shook, ancient stones groaning under the assault. We need to get to the hall, Kieran said, pulling her to her feet. No. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and chaos. Wolves in various states of undress were streaming toward the exits, following emergency protocols drilled into them since childhood. But underlying the organized evacuation was pure terror, screams and shouts mixing with the continuing explosions. They burst into the courtyard to find absolute carnage. The gates had been destroyed, twisted metal and splintered wood scattered across the ground. And pouring through the breach were things. Not wolves. Not entirely. Their forms shifted and writhed, caught between human and animal and something else entirely, something that made Celine's eyes hurt to look at directly. Shadow beasts. Impossible, Kieran breathed. They're extinct. The shadow beasts were wiped out centuries ago. Someone brought them back, Celine said, watching in horror as the creatures tore through the estate's defenders. Regular weapons seemed to pass through them without effect, and their claws left wounds that smoked and festered. A scream drew her attention. A young wolf, barely more than a child, had been separated from his family, trapped against a wall as one of the shadow beasts advanced. The creature's form rippled, revealing too many teeth, too many claws, eyes like pits of endless darkness. The silver flame surged. Celine didn't think. Didn't hesitate. She just ran. The beast lunged for the child, and Celine's hand shot out, silver fire blazing from her palm and slamming into the creature's side. The beast shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and dissolved into smoke. The child stared at her with wide eyes, trembling. Go, Celine told him gently. Find your family. Run. He ran. And Celine turned to face the horde of shadow beasts still flooding through the gates. Kieran was at her side instantly, his sword gleaming in the firelight. These things are immune to normal weapons. But not to silver flame, Celine said, feeling the power coiling in her chest, ready to be unleashed. Kieran, get your people to safety. Get them out of here. I'll hold the line. Not alone you won't. I have to, she insisted. You saw what happened with the child. The silver flame can destroy them. But if I lose control again, if there are too many people around, then I'll be your anchor, Kieran said firmly. Like I was in the hall. Like I'll always be. We're fighting this together, Celine. No arguments. There was no time to argue anyway. The shadow beasts were regrouping, forming a wave of darkness and nightmare that began advancing toward them. Celine counted at least 50. Maybe more. Too many for even her power to handle without consequences. But what choice did they have? Stay close, she said, the pendant at her throat beginning to glow. And whatever happens, don't let me lose myself. Never, Kieran promised. The beasts charged. And Celine let the silver flame free. It erupted from her in a wall of light, meeting the tide of shadow with a sound like thunder. Where flame and darkness collided, reality itself seemed to tear, showing glimpses of something vast and terrible beyond the veil of the world. The beasts shrieked and burned, their forms dissolving under the assault. But more kept coming, pouring through the broken gates in an endless stream. Celine pushed harder, pouring more power into the flame. The pendant burned against her skin, helping her maintain focus, helping her channel the raw energy without losing herself to it. But it wasn't enough. For every beast she destroyed, 2 more appeared. And she could feel her strength waning, the power drain leaving her hollow and shaking. "There's too many," she gasped. "Then we change tactics," Kieran said. "The gates. If we can collapse them, seal the breach." "I don't have enough power left to." "You don't have to do it alone," a voice called from behind them. Celine spun to find Evelyn striding across the courtyard, her ancient face set with determination. And behind her, impossibly, were more wolves. Not estate guards or loyal warriors. These were strangers, wolves with eyes that glowed silver in the darkness, their hands crackling with the same power that burned in Celine's veins. The marked. Others like her. How Celine started. "We felt you awaken," one of them said, a woman with scars crossing her face and silver hair despite her young appearance. "Felt the Silverborn's power calling across the territories. We came as fast as we could." "There are still marked who survived," another added, a man whose entire left arm seemed made of living silver flame. "Hidden. Scattered. Waiting for a sign that we weren't alone anymore. And you gave us that sign," the woman continued, moving to stand beside Celine. "Now let us fight with you. Let us show these creatures and this pack what the marked can do when we stand together." Tears blurred Celine's vision, but she blinked them away. "The gates. We need to seal them." "Then let's do it," the man said, his silver arm blazing brighter. They formed a line, 7 marked wolves including Celine, each one channeling their power into a single, unified force. The silver flame multiplied, amplified, becoming something greater than any of them could achieve alone. "Now," Evelyn commanded. The combined flame slammed into the broken gates and the stone walls surrounding them. The impact shook the entire estate, and for a moment, Celine thought they'd failed. Thought the structure would hold and they'd be overwhelmed. Then the walls began to move. Stone grinding against stone, the gates collapsed inward, sealing the breach, crushing dozens of shadow beasts in the process. The remaining creatures on the inside of the walls found themselves trapped, cut off from whatever source had been spawning them. And the marked turned as one to face them. The battle that followed was brutal and swift. Working together, channeling their power in coordinated strikes, the marked tore through the remaining beasts until nothing remained but wisps of dissipating shadow. Silence fell over the courtyard. Celine collapsed to her knees, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever felt. Kieran was there immediately, supporting her, keeping her upright. Around them, the pack emerged from their hiding places. Wolves who'd witnessed everything. Who'd seen the marked fight not for conquest or control, but for protection. Who'd watched Celine and her newfound allies save lives instead of taking them. "Silverborn," someone whispered. The word spread through the crowd like wildfire. But this time, it wasn't spoken with fear. It was spoken with awe. The scarred woman offered Celine a hand, helping her to her feet. "That was well done. For someone newly awakened, your control is remarkable." "I had help," Celine said, looking at Kieran. At Evelyn. At the pendant still glowing faintly at her throat. "We all need help," the woman replied. "That's what we forgot. What the packs made us forget when they scattered us and hunted us down. That our power is meant to be shared. To protect. To preserve balance." She looked around at the gathered wolves. Maybe it's time they remembered that too. A figure pushed through the crowd. The young kitchen worker Celine had saved in the hall. The girl approached hesitantly, then dropped to one knee. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying in the silence. For saving my life. Twice now. For protecting all of us when you could have just left us to our fate. I'm not a hero, Celine said quietly. No, Kieran said, his voice strong and clear. You're something better. You're someone who chooses compassion over revenge. Who uses power to protect instead of dominate. Who stands and fights when running would be easier. He turned to address the crowd. This is your Silverborn. This is the woman my council condemned. And tonight, she saved all of us. Another wolf knelt. Then another. Within moments, the entire courtyard was filled with kneeling wolves, not in submission, but in respect. In acceptance. Celine felt something break open in her chest. Not the silver flame, but something even more powerful. Something that felt like hope. But even as the crowd began to rise, even as people started calling her name with gratitude instead of fear, Celine's gaze was drawn to the forest beyond the broken gates. Because in the shadows between the trees, she saw movement. A figure standing alone, watching. And even from this distance, she could feel its gaze, cold and calculating and patient. This attack hadn't been random. It had been a test. And whoever was watching had learned exactly what they needed to know. The silver flame stirred in warning, and Celine gripped Kieran's hand tighter. The storm Evelyn had warned about wasn't coming. It was already here. The sun rose over a broken estate. Celine stood on the wall, what remained of it, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, blood and fire colors. Appropriate, given what the night had brought. Below, wolves worked to clear debris, tend the wounded, count their losses. 12 dead, 23 injured. And the gates that had stood for 3 generations reduced to rubble and ash. But they'd survived. Against impossible odds, against creatures that shouldn't exist, they'd survived. Because of her. Because of the marked. Because of a power that had been feared and condemned for centuries, finally being used for something other than destruction. She should have felt victorious. Vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow. You didn't sleep. Kieran's voice came from behind her, familiar now in its warmth and concern. Couldn't, Celine admitted, not turning around. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. The shadow beasts. And the figure watching from the forest. Kieran moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, a small point of contact that somehow steadied the chaos in her mind. Evelyn says the beasts are ancient weapons, created by the first dark sorcerers to fight against the Silverborn bloodline. Someone brought them back specifically to test me, Celine said. To see if I was really what the prophecy claimed. And now they know. Now they know, she echoed. Which means this was just the beginning. Whoever's pulling these strings, they're not going to stop. They're going to keep coming. Keep testing. Keep pushing until, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Until you break, Kieran finished quietly. Or until you become the weapon they fear. Celine finally looked at him, really looked at him. The exhaustion carved into his features. The weight of responsibility he'd been carrying alone for so long. The choice he'd made to stand by her even when it cost him everything. I'm not worth this, she whispered. Not worth what you've sacrificed. What you'll have to keep sacrificing if I stay. That's not your decision to make, Kieran said firmly. I chose you, Celine. Chose this path. And I'd choose it again, even knowing where it leads. Where does it lead? She asked. Because right now, I can't see past the next attack. The next test. The next impossible choice between who I am and who everyone needs me to be. Kieran turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to frame her face, a gesture that had become achingly familiar over these past weeks. It leads wherever we decide. Together. That's the whole point of the prophecy, isn't it? Choice. Not destiny dictated by some ancient seer, but choice made in the moment, when everything hangs in the balance. And what if I choose wrong? Celine's voice cracked. What if the next time I use my power, I can't pull it back? What if I become exactly what Draven said I would, a monster who destroys everything she touches? Then I'll be there, Kieran said, his voice steady as stone. Right beside you. Reminding you who you really are. Pulling you back from the edge, just like you pulled yourself back in the hall. Just like you did last night when you could have obliterated those beasts and half the estate along with them, but you chose control instead. I had help. The other marked. The pendant. You. Exactly, Kieran said, a small smile touching his lips despite everything. You had help. And you accepted it. That's not weakness, Celine. That's wisdom. That's knowing you don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Below them, the scarred woman, who'd introduced herself as Linnea during the aftermath, was teaching young wolves how to recognize the signs of old magic. How to defend against shadow corruption. How to see the marked not as threats, but as protectors. The man with the silver arm, Corvin, was helping rebuild the gates, his power shaping stone and metal with a precision that left the regular builders staring in amazement. The other marked were scattered throughout the estate, healing the wounded, reinforcing the walls, sharing knowledge that had been hidden for generations. For the first time in centuries, the marked and the packs were working together. Do you see that? Kieran asked, following her gaze. That's what you did. Not destruction. Not chaos. Unity. Hope. A future where maybe, just maybe, your people don't have to hide anymore. Celine wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that this fragile peace could last. But she couldn't shake the image of that figure in the forest. The sense of being watched. Being tested. There's a war coming, she said quietly. I can feel it. Something bigger than shadow beasts or council betrayals. Something that's been building for centuries, waiting for the Silverborn to return. Then we'll face it, Kieran said simply. Not alone. Not unprepared. But together. You, me, the marked, anyone willing to stand against the darkness. He paused, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. The prophecy said you'd face a choice, salvation, or destruction. But maybe it's not one moment. One decision. Maybe it's 1,000 small choices, made every day, about who you want to be and what you're willing to fight for. And who have I chosen to be? Celine asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. Someone who saves children from monsters, Kieran said. Someone who prays for people who condemned her. Someone who surrendered herself to save hostages. Someone who stands and fights instead of running, even when running would be easier. His forehead pressed against hers. Someone brave. Someone compassionate. Someone worthy of every sacrifice I've made and will continue to make. Tears slipped down Celine's cheeks, but this time they weren't born from despair. They were born from something that felt dangerously close to hope. I don't know if I can be what they need me to be, she admitted. What the prophecy needs me to be. Then don't be what they need, Kieran said. Be yourself. Be the woman who heard me dying on a battlefield and decided to save me anyway. Be the woman who learned to control power that terrifies her because people she cares about needed protecting. Be Celine. Not the Silverborn. Not the prophecy. Just you. And if that's not enough? Then it's not enough, Kieran said with a shrug. But at least you'll face whatever comes as yourself, not as some role someone else assigned you. At least you'll make your choices freely, knowing you stayed true to who you are. Celine looked out over the estate one more time. At the wolves working together. At the marked who'd found community after decades of isolation. At the broken gates that would be rebuilt stronger than before. At the future she'd been too afraid to imagine until Kieran had opened that cell door and offered his hand. I'm staying, she said finally. Whatever comes. Whatever war is building in the shadows. I'm staying. I'm fighting. I'm choosing this. Choosing what? Kieran asked, though his smile said he already knew. Choosing us, Celine said, turning to face him fully. Choosing hope over fear. Choosing to believe that maybe, just maybe, I can be both powerful and good. Both Silverborn and just. Celine. Kieran pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from every threat the world might throw at them. And for this moment, in the golden light of dawn, Selene let herself believe he could. "So what happens now?" she asked against his chest. "Now," Kieran pulled back just enough to look at her, his eyes reflecting the sunrise and something deeper, something that looked like love. "Now we prepare. We train. We build alliances with the marked and any pack willing to stand with us. We find out who's really behind these attacks and what they want." He paused. "And we show them that the Silverborn isn't some prophecy to be manipulated. She's a woman who makes her own choices. And she's chosen to fight back." From the forest, as if in response to his words, another howl rose, long and haunting and full of promise. Or warning. Selene felt the silver flame stir in recognition. Felt the pendant grow warm against her skin. Felt the weight of everything she'd become and everything she might still have to be settling across her shoulders like a mantle. But this time, she didn't crumble under it. This time, she stood tall. "Let them come," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Whoever's out there, whatever they're planning, let them come. Because I'm done running, done hiding, done apologizing for existing." "That's my Silverborn," Kieran murmured, pride clear in his voice. "No," Selene corrected, a fierce smile touching her lips for the first time since the attack. "I'm not your Silverborn. I'm not anyone's weapon or tool or prophecy fulfillment." She looked at him, at this Alpha King who'd chosen her over everything, who'd stood beside her through impossible odds. "I'm just a woman with power I'm still learning to control. A woman who fell in love with someone foolish enough to open a cell door and offer hope when there should have been none." The words hung between them, that admission she'd been too afraid to voice until now. That truth that changed everything and nothing all at once. "Fell in love," Kieran repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Past tense." "Present," Selene whispered. "Very present." He kissed her then, soft and fierce and full of promises neither of them could guarantee they'd keep. But they'd try. Gods, they'd try. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully risen, washing the estate in warm light that made even the destruction look beautiful. Transformative. Like endings that were secretly beginnings. "So," Kieran said, his hand finding hers and threading their fingers together. "Ready to face whatever comes next?" Selene looked at their joined hands. At the silver flame dancing harmlessly across her palm, responding to her will instead of controlling her. At the pendant that marked her as Silverborn, but also as someone who'd chosen her own path. At the future spreading before them like uncharted territory, full of danger and possibility in equal measure. "Not even a little bit," she admitted with a laugh that was half sob. "But I'm doing it anyway. That's all anyone can ask," Kieran said. They stood together on that broken wall, watching the pack rebuild, watching the marked integrate, watching a world slowly transform from fear to something that might eventually become acceptance. And in the forest beyond, that figure watched too, calculating, planning, waiting for the next move in a game that had been centuries in the making. The prophecy had spoken of a choice. But what it hadn't said, what no prophecy could predict, was that Selene had already made it. Not in one grand moment of destiny, but in 1,000 small decisions. Every time she'd chosen compassion over bitterness. Every time she'd chosen to stand instead of run. Every time she'd chosen hope over despair. The question was never whether she'd save or destroy the world. The question was whether the world would let her save herself. Would you have chosen her? Standing in that courtyard, watching silver flame dance across her skin while shadow beasts screamed and died? Would you have knelt with the others? Offered your loyalty to a woman the world called monster? Or would you have feared her too? It's easy to say you'd be different. That you'd see past the power to the person underneath. That you'd understand her struggle, her pain, her desperate attempt to be good when everything inside her burned with the potential for destruction. But fear is a powerful thing. It makes us see threats in shadows. Makes us condemn what we don't understand. makes us choose safety over justice again and again until we forget what justice even looks like. Celine chose to stay, chose to fight, chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could be both powerful and worthy of love. But her story isn't over. It's only beginning. And the darkness she felt watching from the forest? It's still out there. Still planning. Still waiting for the moment when she'll have to make the choice the prophecy really spoke of, the one that will define not just her fate, but the fate of every wolf in every territory. The question isn't whether that moment will come. The question is whether she'll face it alone, or with an army of people who finally learned to see past their fear. People who chose her side when choosing her meant risking everything. People like Kieran. Like the marked who answered her call. Like that young kitchen worker who knelt in gratitude instead of terror. People like you. If this story touched something deep inside you, if Celine's struggle resonated with your own battles against fear and doubt, then subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because here, we don't just tell stories about powerful women who save the world. We tell stories about broken women who save themselves. About warriors who fight with compassion instead of cruelty. About love that chooses to see the person beneath the power again and again until that person finally learns to see themselves. This is where prophecies are rewritten. Where monsters become heroes. Where the girl locked in darkness learns she was always meant to burn with light. Subscribe to Shayla's Romance Library. Because Celine's story isn't over. And neither is yours.